The pencil trembled in my small hand as I stared at the blackboard, my 8-year-old mind desperately trying to make sense of the white chalk marks that seemed to mock me from their dark surface. Around me, 27 other second graders copied their spelling words with the casual confidence of children who had never questioned whether a B might suddenly flip itself into a D when no one was looking. Elena Castellano. Sister Mary Catherine's voice cut through the November afternoon like a blade through silk. Please come to the board and write the word dog. My heart hammered against my ribs as I stood acutely aware of every eye in the classroom following my movement. The walk from my desk to the front of the room felt endless, each step echoing in the sudden silence that had fallen over St. Anthony's Elementary School. I picked up the chalk with fingers that refused to stop shaking. 3 letters. Just 3 simple letters that every child in America learned by the time they were 6. D-O-G. I could spell it perfectly in my head, could see it clearly in my mind's eye. But the moment I tried to transfer that knowledge to the blackboard, something went terribly wrong. The D came out backwards. The O looked more like a squashed oval, and the G somehow ended up facing the wrong direction entirely. When I stepped back to examine my work, the word on the board bore no resemblance to anything in the English language. The snickers started immediately quiet at first, then growing bolder as children realized Sister Mary Catherine wasn't going to stop them. Tommy Ricci, the butcher's son who sat behind me, whispered loud enough for half the class to hear. Even my baby sister can write better than that, and she's only 4. Elena. Sister Mary Catherine's voice carried that particular tone of disappointment that cut deeper than any shouting. This is completely unacceptable work. You will stay after school today to practice your letters until you can write them correctly. I nodded mutely, my cheeks burning with shame as I returned to my seat. But staying after school wouldn't help. I had already stayed after school 17 times this year, and the letters still danced and flipped and refused to behave themselves, no matter how hard I concentrated. What I didn't know, what none of us knew in November of 1962, was that my father was standing outside the classroom window at that very moment. Papa had left work early at the Charlestown Navy Yard, telling his foreman he needed to check on his daughter's progress in school. He had witnessed the entire humiliating scene, had seen his eldest child make a fool of herself, and by extension, make a fool of him. I wouldn't learn about Papa's presence until much later, when the bruises had faded and the basement door had been permanently sealed. But as I sat in that classroom, fighting back tears, while the other children whispered about my stupidity, Papa was already planning what he would call my final lesson. Our 3-story tenement on Hanover Street housed 6 families, each crammed into apartments that seemed to shrink a little more with each passing year, as Boston's Italian population swelled beyond the North End's capacity. The Castellano family occupied the 2nd floor, Papa, Mama, myself, and my 4-year-old sister Lucia, who had inherited Papa's thick dark hair and Mama's gift for learning things quickly. Lucia could already recognize her letters and sound out simple words, a fact that Papa mentioned with increasing frequency as my own struggles became more apparent. Look at this, he would say during our nightly homework sessions, holding up one of Lucia's picture books. Your baby sister can read cat and hat and sat. She's 4 years old, Elena. 4. What's your excuse? I never had a good answer for that question. How do you explain to a man like Salvatore Castellano, a man who measured worth through visible achievement, that letters moved around when you weren't looking directly at them? How do you describe the way words seemed to scramble themselves just to torment you? Papa worked 16-hour days welding ship hulls, his hands permanently stained with metal and grease, his back bent from years of hunching over his work. He had immigrated to America at age 12, speaking no English, carrying nothing but his father's trade and his mother's prayers. In his mind, education was the golden ladder that would lift his daughters above the life of manual labor that had claimed 3 generations of Castellano men. In the old country, only the rich learned to read, he would tell me, as he examined my homework each evening. Here in America, even poor children can get an education. You think I work myself to death for my health? I do it so you can have what I never had. But what Papa never told me, what I wouldn't discover until years later, was that his own relationship with written language was more complicated than anyone suspected. I began to notice small things, the way he would ask Mama to check the spelling on forms he filled out claiming his eyes were tired from work. The way he held newspapers at odd angles, squinting at headlines as if the print were too small. The way he would listen intently to radio news broadcasts, then later repeat the stories almost word for word as if he had read them himself. Mama Rosa Benedetta Castellano was a small woman with large, expressive eyes and hands that never seemed to stop moving, cooking, cleaning, mending, soothing. She had completed 8th grade before marriage, which made her one of the more educated women in our neighborhood. She read voraciously romance novels borrowed from the library Italian newspapers from the North End religious books that helped her navigate the complex rituals of raising Catholic children in America. It was Mama who first suggested that my struggles might be more than simple laziness or lack of attention. Sal, I heard her say one evening as I pretended to sleep in the bedroom I shared with Lucia. Maybe we should take Elena to see Dr. Benedetti. Mrs. Torino's son had trouble with reading too, and the doctor said it was something with his eyes. Nothing wrong with her eyes. Papa's voice carried clearly through the thin walls. She can see fine when she wants to see, can spot a penny on the sidewalk from half a block away. This is about paying attention, Rosa, about applying herself. But what if it's something else? What if she needs glasses, or what she needs is discipline? Papa's tone indicated that the conversation was over. What she needs is to understand that failure has consequences. The visit to Dr. Benedetti happened anyway on a cold January morning when Papa was working double shifts to pay off Christmas debts. Mama wrapped me in my heavy winter coat and led me through the snow-covered streets to the doctor's office above Torino's bakery, the smell of fresh bread mixing with the antiseptic scent of medical supplies. Dr. Benedetti was a kind man with gentle hands and wire-rimmed glasses that reminded me of the pictures of saints in our church. He examined my eyes with bright lights, tested my hearing with strange beeping machines, and asked me to perform tasks that seemed more like games than medical tests. "Draw me a picture of your family," he said, sliding a sheet of paper and a box of crayons across his desk. I drew happily, Papa tall and strong in his work clothes, Mama with her dark hair pinned up in a neat bun, Lucia small and smiling, and myself standing between them. Drawing felt natural, joyful, right. My hands knew exactly what to do, and the colored wax flowed across the paper like magic. Beautiful work, Elena," Dr. Benedetti said, studying my picture carefully. "Now, can you write your name under the drawing?" The joy evaporated instantly. I picked up a crayon with suddenly trembling fingers and tried to write, "Elena!" But the letters came out backwards sideways, completely illegible. My beautiful family portrait was ruined by the chaotic scribbles beneath it. Dr. Benedetti watched this transformation with keen interest. "Elena, can you tell me what happens when you try to read?" For the first time in my young life, an adult was asking me to describe my experience, rather than simply telling me to try harder. The words tumbled out like water from a burst dam. "The letters move, doctor. They flip around and change places when I'm not looking directly at them. Sometimes the B becomes a D and the P turns into a Q. And when I'm really tired, they dance around like they're alive, like they're playing tricks on me just to make me feel stupid." Dr. Benedetti nodded thoughtfully, making notes on his pad in handwriting so neat it looked like typewriter print. When he finished writing, he looked at Mama with serious eyes. "Mrs. Castellano Elena has a condition we're beginning to understand better in the medical community. It's called developmental dyslexia, a neurological difference that affects how the brain processes written language. It's likely related to her premature birth, though we can't be certain." Mama's face went pale as communion wafer. "But doctor, can you fix it?" Can you make her normal? She is normal, Mrs. Castellano, Dr. Benedetti said gently but firmly. Elena's intelligence is completely intact. In fact, based on our conversation and her artwork, I'd say she's quite bright. Her brain simply processes visual information differently than most people. With proper teaching methods, patience and understanding children with dyslexia can learn to read and write quite successfully. He handed Mama a letter sealed in an official envelope, along with a pamphlet titled, Understanding Your Dyslexic Child. Give this to her teacher. It explains Elena's condition and recommends some accommodations that should help her learn more effectively. We left that office with something I had never possessed before: hope. My struggles had a name: dyslexia, and more importantly, they weren't my fault. I wasn't lazy or stupid or defiant. My brain was just wired differently, like some radios picked up AM signals while others received FM. But our hope was premature. What we didn't realize was that Papa had been watching from across the street when we entered Dr. Benedetti's office, had seen us emerge with official papers and serious expressions. That night, when Mama presented the doctor's letter and tried to explain about dyslexia and neurological differences, Papa's reaction was swift and devastating. DARS. Learning disability. He crumpled the letter without reading it, his face flushing red as marinara sauce. That's fancy doctor talk for lazy. There's nothing wrong with that girl except she doesn't want to work. Sal, please just listen. I don't want to hear excuses. Papa's voice boomed through our small apartment, rattling the dishes in Mama's china cabinet. My father couldn't read or write, worked 18 hours a day in the quarries, but he raised 5 children who all became successful through hard work, not doctor's notes. He turned those dark, angry eyes on me, and I felt like a bug pinned to a specimen board. You think you can fool everyone with this disability nonsense? You think you can coast through life making people feel sorry for you? Well, let me tell you something, young lady, the world doesn't care about your problems. The world only cares about results. From that moment forward, Papa's disappointment crystallized into something much darker and more dangerous. He began testing me at random moments, pulling out newspapers and demanding I read headlines aloud when neighbors came to visit, as if my success might finally prove I wasn't defective. Go ahead, Elena, he would say, with that terrifying smile that never reached his eyes. Show Mr. Torino how well you're doing in school. Read this headline about President Kennedy. I would stand there trembling, staring at black marks on white paper that might as well have been ancient hieroglyphics. The adults would shift uncomfortably as I stammered through wild guesses, and Papa's face would darken with each incorrect word. You see, he would say to his embarrassed friends after I fled to my room in tears, this is what happens when children aren't properly disciplined. When parents make excuses instead of demanding excellence. Winter deepened, and with it, Papa's obsession with my academic failures. Every night became a battle at our kitchen table, the overhead light casting harsh shadows as Papa supervised my homework with the intensity of a military drill sergeant. What's this word, Elena? He would point to simple text in my reader, his calloused finger tapping impatiently against the page. I would stare at the letters, willing them to stay still long enough for me to decode their meaning. Sometimes I got lucky, and the word would hold steady, allowing me to sound it out correctly. But more often, the letters would scramble themselves, just as I thought I understood, leaving me speechless and increasingly panicked. I don't know, Papa. You don't know because you're not trying. Look harder. I would look harder, concentrate until my head throbbed with the effort, but the letters continued their maddening dance. Papa's breathing would grow heavier, his patience wearing thin as cheesecloth. This is a simple word, Elena. House. House. 5 letters. A first grader should be able to read this without thinking. But when I looked at the page, the letters arranged themselves differently each time, ciudad or ojuez, or sometimes just a meaningless jumble that bore no resemblance to any word in any language. It was during one of these sessions on a particularly bitter February evening that Papa made a discovery that would seal my fate. He had been helping me with a reading assignment when Lucia wandered into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from her eyes and carrying her favorite picture book. "Papa, will you read to me?" she asked in her sweet 4-year-old voice. "Not now, Princess. Your sister and I are working." But Lucia, with the persistence of young children, climbed onto Papa's lap and opened her book to the first page. "Look, Papa, I can read this word, thee, and this one, cat, and this one, sat." She pointed to each word as she spoke, sounding them out with the confidence of a child who had never doubted that letters would behave themselves. Papa's attention shifted from me to Lucia, his expression transforming from frustration to amazement. "Show me more, Princess." For the next 10 minutes, I sat forgotten at the kitchen table, while my 4-year-old sister demonstrated reading skills that surpassed my own. She wasn't just memorizing, she was actually decoding words, applying phonetic rules, making connections between sounds and symbols that remained mysterious to me. When Papa finally looked back at me, his eyes held something I had never seen before: disgust. "She's 4 years old, Elena. 4. And she can read better than you can after 2 years of school." His voice was quiet, controlled, which somehow made it more frightening than his usual shouting. "What does that tell you about yourself?" I had no answer. What could I say? That my brain was broken while Lucia's worked perfectly. That God had given my little sister abilities. He had denied me that sometimes families produced children who were simply defective. Papa sent Lucia back to bed, then turned to face me across the kitchen table. In the harsh overhead light, his features looked carved from stone. "I've been too patient with you, Elena. Too understanding. Too willing to accept excuses." He stood slowly, his chair scraping against the linoleum floor. "Time to try a different approach." That night, I lay in bed listening to my parents argue through the thin walls of our apartment. Their voices rose and fell like distant thunder, carrying fragments of anger, disappointment, and fear. "Can't keep making excuses for her Rosa. She's just a little girl, Sal. Other children don't have these problems. And maybe if we found a different school." "Waste of money we don't have." "Your grandfather always said that sometimes you have to break a horse before you can ride it." That last comment, spoken in Papa's voice, made my blood turn to ice water. I had heard him use that expression before when talking about difficult employees at the shipyard, men who needed to be broken before they would accept discipline. I pulled my thin pillow over my head, trying to block out the sound of my parents' marriage fracturing under the weight of my failures. Everything wrong in our house could be traced back to my inability to master skills that other children learned effortlessly. The incident that triggered everything happened on a gray Monday morning in early March. Sister Mary Catherine had assigned us a simple writing exercise copy, a paragraph from our reading book, paying careful attention to spelling and punctuation. For most children, this was routine busy work. For me, it was torture. I stared at the paragraph until my eyes watered, trying to force the letters to stay still long enough for me to copy them. But as always, they refused to cooperate. The B's became D's, the P's flipped into EQs, and entire words rearranged themselves when I wasn't looking directly at them. My copied paragraph looked like it had been written by someone having a seizure. Letters faced wrong directions, words were missing entire syllables, and the spacing between words varied wildly. When Sister Mary Catherine collected our papers, she held mine up like a specimen of disease. "Class," she announced in her crisp voice, "this is what happens when children don't apply themselves properly. Elena Castellano has had 2 full years to master basic writing skills, yet her work looks like that of a kindergarten student." The humiliation burned through me like acid. 27 pairs of eyes stared at my shameful paper, some with pity, but most with the cruel amusement of children who had found someone to feel superior to. "Elena will stay after school today to practice her letters until she can write them correctly." Sister Mary Catherine continued. Perhaps extra time and effort will help her catch up to the rest of the class. But someone else had been watching this scene unfold. Papa had taken another early break from work, concerned about reports from my teacher. He stood outside the classroom window, his face pressed against the glass, witnessing his daughter's public humiliation. I wouldn't learn about Papa's presence until much later, but neighbors would tell me years afterward that they had seen Salvatore Castellano standing in the schoolyard that day, his hands clenched into fists, his face dark as a thundercloud. They said he stood there for nearly an hour after the dismissal bell rang, just staring at the school building as if it were a fortress he was planning to assault. When I finally arrived home that evening, exhausted from another fruitless session of letter practice, I found Papa sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of wine and the evening newspaper spread before him. Mama was preparing dinner, but there was a tension in her movements that set my nerves on edge. "Elena," Papa said without looking up from his paper. "Come here." I approached cautiously, my book bag still slung over my shoulder. Papa folded his newspaper with precise movements and looked at me with eyes that seemed to see straight through to my soul. "Your teacher called me at work today." My heart sank. Phone calls from school were never good news in the Castellano household. "She says you're not trying hard enough. Says you turn in work that looks like a baby wrote it." Papa's voice was steady, controlled, which frightened me more than shouting would have. "She says maybe I need to provide more structure at home." "I am trying, Papa. I swear on the Madonna I'm trying as hard as I can." "Trying hard would show results." He stood slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Trying hard would mean progress from week to week, month to month. What you're doing isn't trying, it's pretending to try while making excuses." From the stove, Mama turned to intervene. "Sal, maybe we should what, Rosa? Make more excuses? Find more doctors to tell us our daughter is special." Papa's voice carried a dangerous edge. "No more excuses. No more coddling. Tonight, Elena learns what real consequences feel like." I didn't understand what he meant until much later that evening, when the house had grown quiet and Lucia was fast asleep. I was lying in bed trying to puzzle out a simple book about a dog named Spot when I heard my bedroom door creak open. Papa stood silhouetted in the doorway, but something was different about him. He seemed larger, somehow more solid, as if he had been carved from granite rather than flesh and blood. "Get up, Elena. We're going downstairs." "Papa, what's wrong? Did I do something?" "You did everything wrong. Now get up, quietly. Don't wake your sister." I slipped out of bed, my bare feet touching the cold linoleum floor. Lucia stirred, but didn't wake, her small body curled around her favorite stuffed rabbit. I followed Papa through our dark apartment, my heart hammering so loud I was certain the whole building could hear it. We passed through the kitchen where Mama sat at the table with her head in her hands. She looked up as we passed, her eyes red with tears she was trying not to shed. "Sal, please," she whispered. "She's just a little girl." "She's a little girl who needs to learn that actions have consequences," Papa replied without stopping. "Stay here, Rosa. This doesn't concern you." We continued down the narrow hallway to a door I had rarely paid attention to, the entrance to the basement that served the entire building. Papa produced a large key from his pocket and turned it in the lock with a sound like bones cracking. "Papa, where are we going?" He didn't answer. Instead, he opened the door to reveal a darkness so complete it seemed to have physical weight. The basement stairs descended into blackness, and the smell that rose from below was suffocating mold, rotting wood, and something else I couldn't identify. Papa switched on a single bare bulb that cast sickly yellow light over what would become my prison. The basement was larger than I had imagined, stretching beneath the entire building with a low ceiling supported by thick wooden posts. Moldy cardboard boxes leaned against sweating concrete walls. Rusty tools hung from nails like instruments of torture. And in one corner, Papa had prepared something that made my blood freeze. A makeshift bedroom consisting of old army blankets and a pillow that reeked of mothballs. Nearby sat a bucket that I realized with growing horror was meant to serve as my toilet. "This is where children who refuse to learn belong," Papa said, his voice echoing strangely in the confined space. "In the dark, with the rats and the spiders, until they understand the value of education." "Papa, please, I'll try harder in school. I promise I'll learn to read." "You've been promising that for 2 years. He reached behind one of the support posts and produced something that made my heart stop beating, a thick leather belt with a heavy metal buckle darker and more threatening than the belt he wore with his work clothes. "Do you know why you're here, Elena Rose?" Terror had stolen my voice. I could only stare at him with eyes that felt too large for my face. "You're here because promising isn't enough anymore. You're here because you've wasted every opportunity I've given you. You're here because you've brought shame on the Castellano name." The first strike came without warning. Leather cracked against my back through the thin cotton of my nightgown, and pain exploded through my small body like lightning striking water. I bit my lip hard enough to taste blood, some deep instinct telling me that screaming would only make everything worse. "This is what happens to children who choose to be stupid," Papa said, raising the belt again. "This is what happens when you refuse to use the brain God gave you." Crack. Another strike, then another. I lost count after the 7th blow, lost everything except the burning agony and the desperate need to stay upright. When I finally fell to my knees in the dirt, Papa stepped back to examine his work. "Now you'll stay here until you decide to become the daughter I raised you to be," he said, hanging the belt on a nail driven into one of the support posts. "Until you stop making excuses and start making progress." "Papa, please don't leave me here alone. I'm scared." But he was already climbing the wooden stairs, each step taking him further from my desperate pleas. "If you make noise, if you cause trouble, if you do anything except think about your failures and how to correct them, you'll stay down here longer." The light went out. The door slammed shut with the finality of a coffin lid. The lock clicked into place with a sound like my heart breaking. And then there was only darkness, a darkness so absolute and suffocating that it seemed to press against me like a living thing, trying to squeeze the breath from my lungs. Day 1, the descent. The darkness in that basement was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't simply the absence of light, it was the presence of something much more terrible. A blackness so complete that I couldn't tell if my eyes were open or closed, so dense that it seemed to have weight and texture. I had never understood the phrase deafening silence until that first night. The basement was never truly quiet. There were constant sounds that my terrified imagination transformed into monsters. Water dripped steadily somewhere in the darkness, each drop marking time like a funeral bell. Things scurried across the concrete floor with tiny claws that scraped and scratched. Worst of all were the sounds I couldn't identify, creaking that might have been old wood settling, or something much more sinister moving through the shadows. I found my pile of moldy blankets by feeling along the damp walls, my hands encountering spiderwebs and surfaces that felt suspiciously sticky. The blankets smelled of mildew and decades of neglect, but they were all that stood between me and the cold concrete floor. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined Papa returning with his terrible belt. Every sound made me jump, thinking it might be rats coming to investigate this new presence in their domain. My back burned where the leather had marked me, and the thin nightgown provided no protection against the March cold that seeped through the basement's foundation. I tried to pray, but even the Lord's Prayer seemed impossible in that godless place. The words felt hollow, meaningless, as if God himself couldn't penetrate the darkness that surrounded me. Sometime during the night, though, time had no meaning in that place. I heard footsteps on the floor above. Not the heavy boots of Papa returning from a late shift, but the soft slippers of someone trying not to make noise. "Mama." I pressed my ear to the ceiling, following the sound of her movement through our apartment above. She paused directly over where I lay, and I could almost feel her thinking about me, worrying about me, agonizing over her inability to help me. "Mama," I whispered to the darkness, though I knew she couldn't hear me through the concrete and wood. "Please come get me. Please don't let me die down here." But Mama didn't come. Couldn't come. Papa had the key, and defying him would mean risking his fury not just on herself, but on Lucia as well. Day 2, the first visit. I woke to the sound of the basement door opening, though I had no idea what time it was or whether it was day or night. The sudden appearance of light, even the weak yellow glow from that single bare bulb, was like being stabbed in the eyes with needles. Papa descended the stairs slowly, deliberately carrying a bucket of water and what looked like a piece of bread wrapped in cloth. He had changed out of his work clothes into the dark suit he wore to church, and his hair was slicked back with pomade. It was Sunday, I realized. I had been in the basement for an entire night and most of a day. "Have you thought about your situation, Elena?" he asked, setting the bucket down just out of my reach. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the pain in my stiff muscles. My nightgown was filthy now, stained with dirt and things I didn't want to identify. "Yes, Papa, I've thought about it a lot." "And what conclusions have you reached?" I desperately searched for words that might satisfy him, might earn my freedom from this nightmare. "I need to try harder in school. I need to pay better attention to Sister Mary Catherine. I need to stop making excuses." Papa smiled, but it was the cold smile of a predator toying with wounded prey. "The same empty promises you've been making for 2 years. Words are cheap, Elena. Actions matter." He reached for the belt hanging on its nail, and my entire body began to shake uncontrollably. "Please, Papa, I meant it. I'll do whatever you want. I'll read every book in the library." "What I want," he said, wrapping one end of the belt around his hand, "is results. Not promises, not tears, not more excuses. Results." The beating that followed was systematic, methodical, worse than the first. Papa had had time to think about technique, to consider which angles would cause the most pain, without leaving marks that might be visible to teachers or neighbors. He struck me across the back, the shoulders, the legs, anywhere that would be covered by my school uniform. When he finished, I was curled in a ball on the dirt floor, too weak to even cry. Papa produced the bucket he had brought and threw ice-cold water over me, soaking my nightgown and the moldy blankets. "To wash away the stupidity," he said matter-of-factly, as if he were discussing the weather. "Maybe being cold and wet will help you think more clearly." He left me there shivering and soaked, plunged once again into absolute darkness. The wet nightgown clung to my skin, making the cold even more unbearable. I wrapped the damp blankets around myself and tried to generate warmth through sheer willpower, but my small body was already weakening from the combination of fear, hunger, and physical abuse. Day 3, Mama's secret visit. The third day brought a new sound, light footsteps on the basement stairs, so careful they hardly made the old wood creak. Then a whisper through the locked door. "Elena, baby, are you there?" "Mama." I crawled to the door on hands and knees, pressing my face against the rough wood. "Please, get me out of here. I'm so scared." "I can't, sweetheart." Her voice was thick with tears I could hear but not see. "He took the key with him to work, hid it somewhere I can't find. But I brought you some food." She slid a small bundle through the gap at the bottom of the door, bread and cheese wrapped in one of her good cloth napkins, along with a small jar of water. I devoured the food like a starving animal, barely tasting it, just desperate to fill the gnawing emptiness in my stomach. "Mama, how long does Papa want me to stay here?" There was a long pause before she answered, and when she spoke, her voice carried a despair that made my heart sink. "Until you learn, baby. Until you can read like the other children." The implication was clear. Papa believed my dyslexia was a choice I was making, a stubborn refusal to apply myself properly. In his mind, enough punishment would eventually force me to abandon my laziness and embrace proper learning. Mama, I try so hard, but the letters just won't stay still. They move around and change places, and I can't make them stop. I know, sweetheart. I know you try. But your papa, he thinks... She trailed off, unable to voice what we both understood. Papa thought I was lying about my difficulties, pretending to have problems in order to avoid work. After Mama left, I was alone again with the rats and the darkness and the terrible understanding that my imprisonment might last indefinitely. If Papa truly believed my dyslexia was willful disobedience, then no amount of suffering would be enough to cure me of a condition I couldn't control. Day 4. The fever begins. By the 4th day, my body was beginning to break down. The combination of cold, inadequate food stress, and the damp conditions had weakened my immune system beyond its ability to cope. I woke shivering uncontrollably, my forehead burning with fever, while my body felt wrapped in ice. The fever brought hallucinations that were almost worse than the reality of my situation. I saw Papa everywhere in the darkness, belt in hand, ready to deliver fresh punishments. I saw monsters with glowing red eyes creeping toward me across the basement floor. Most disturbing of all, I had entire conversations with people who weren't there. My dead grandmother, who told me I was being punished for my sins. My teacher, Sister Mary Catherine, who insisted I could read perfectly if I just tried harder. Even President Kennedy, who explained that dyslexic children were a threat to America's future. The rats were getting bolder now, investigating this new presence in their domain. I could feel them scurrying near my feet as I tried to sleep, and twice I woke to find one sitting on my chest, its small, dark eyes reflecting some light source I couldn't identify. Once, when I was too weak to move quickly enough, one of them bit my finger, a sharp pain that drew blood and left a wound that would later become infected. Mama came again that day, bringing more bread and water, but I was too feverish to eat much. Through the door, she whispered prayers in Italian, ancient words of protection that our grandmothers had carried across the ocean from the old country. "Elena, I wrote a letter," she said so quietly I had to strain to hear her. "To your Uncle Vincent in Providence. I told him what's happening. He's coming to help us." Uncle Vincent. Even in my fevered state, that name sparked a tiny flame of hope. Papa's younger brother was the only person I had ever seen Papa show deference to, a war veteran who had earned respect through violence and had never backed down from a fight. But Providence was 100 miles away, and I was dying a little more each day. Day 5. The breaking point. The 5th day was when I truly began to lose my grip on reality. The fever had spiked higher, and I drifted in and out of delirium, sometimes thinking I was back in my warm bed upstairs, sometimes believing I had died and gone to purgatory. The hallucinations became more vivid, more detailed. I had long conversations with my sister Lucia, who sat beside me on the moldy blankets and shared stories about her day at nursery school. I played elaborate games of hide-and-seek with children who existed only in my fevered imagination. Most disturbing of all, I began to see my father as he must have been as a child, a frightened 8-year-old boy being beaten by his own father for the crime of being unable to read. In my delirium, I understood with perfect clarity what I couldn't have grasped in health. Papa was repeating a cycle of abuse that stretched back generations. His father had beaten him for his learning difficulties, just as his grandfather had probably beaten his father. Each generation passed down the trauma like a cursed inheritance, convinced they were building character through cruelty. The rats were no longer afraid of me. They crawled across my body as I lay helpless, investigating my wounds, drawn by the smell of infection and fever. I was too weak to drive them away, too sick to care much about their presence. It was during this 5th day that I heard new sounds from above, adult voices raised in anger, furniture being moved, heavy footsteps that didn't belong to our family. But in my fevered state, I couldn't tell if these sounds were real or just another hallucination. Day 6, Uncle Vincent's arrival. I woke to the sound of shouting, real shouting this time, not the fever dreams that had plagued me for days. Adult male voices raised in fury, one of them carrying an authority that cut through even Papa's bluster. "Where is she, Sal? Where's the girl?" "Vincent, you don't understand. She's defiant, refuses to learn. Sometimes harsh measures are necessary to—" Harsh measures. You locked an 8-year-old in a basement. What kind of monster have you become? Uncle Vincent had arrived just as Mama had promised. But I was too weak to call out, too sick to make noise that might help him find me. I lay in the darkness, listening to the argument above, praying that he would think to check the basement. "She needs discipline, Vincent. Structure. You don't understand what it's like raising a child who won't learn, who brings shame on the family name." "I understand plenty about shame, Sal. And right now you're the one bringing shame on the Castellano name." The argument continued for what felt like hours, voices rising and falling, punctuated by the sound of doors slamming and furniture being moved. At one point, I heard Mama crying deep, wrenching sobs that spoke of years of suppressed fear and guilt. Then finally, miraculously, I heard footsteps on the basement stairs. Day 7, Rescue and Revelation. The basement door burst open and light flooded my prison like the arrival of angels. Uncle Vincent stood at the top of the stairs, his face a mask of rage and disbelief, with Mama behind him, clutching a ring of keys. "Jesus Christ!" Uncle Vincent's voice boomed through the basement. "Rosa, call Dr. Benedetti, now!" He rushed down the stairs and knelt beside me in the dirt, his expression transforming from anger to horror when he saw my condition. I was barely conscious, burning with fever covered in rat bites and the welts from Papa's belt. My nightgown was torn and filthy, and I had lost so much weight that I looked more like a scarecrow than a child. "Elena, sweetheart, can you hear me? Uncle Vincent is here. You're safe now." I tried to speak, but could only make croaking sounds. 7 days without proper food and water, combined with the fever and infection, had left me weak as a newborn kitten. Uncle Vincent scooped me up in his strong arms and carried me toward the blessed light above. As we emerged from the basement, I saw Papa backed against the kitchen wall, his hands raised defensively, his face ashen with what might have been shame or fear. "Vincent, you have to understand." "The only thing I understand," Uncle Vincent said, his voice deadly quiet as he held me close to his chest, "is that you tortured a child, your own child, and for that you're going to pay." The next few hours passed in a blur of warm blankets, hot soup, and gentle voices asking if I hurt anywhere, if I could remember what had happened. Dr. Benedetti arrived and examined me carefully, documenting every injury while making grim notes on his medical pad. "She'll recover physically," he told Uncle Vincent and Mama in voices they thought I couldn't hear. "But the psychological trauma, that will take much longer to heal. She'll need counseling, patience, and above all, she'll need to feel safe again." While the doctor worked, Uncle Vincent made phone calls that would change everything. The first was to the police. The second was to a lawyer who specialized in child protection cases. "I want him prosecuted to the full extent of the law," Uncle Vincent told the officers who came to take statements. "And I want legal custody of Elena until this is resolved." But the most shocking revelation came when Uncle Vincent went through Papa's personal belongings looking for evidence of the systematic abuse I had endured. In an old shoebox hidden in Papa's bedroom closet, he found something that changed our understanding of everything that had happened. Letters. Dozens of them dating back to Papa's own childhood in the 1920s. "Look at this," Uncle Vincent said, holding up a yellowed piece of paper. "It's a letter from Sal's teacher to your grandfather Giuseppe, dated 1925. He read aloud in a voice heavy with revelation. "Salvatore continues to struggle with reading despite our best efforts. The letters appear to reverse themselves on the page for him, and he often writes them backwards or upside down. He is clearly intelligent in other areas, but this particular difficulty seems beyond his ability to overcome through effort alone. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Papa had dyslexia, the same condition he had been punishing me for having. His entire adult life had been built on hiding this disability, compensating through memorization and avoidance, living in constant fear of being discovered. "Ah, you son of a bitch!" Uncle Vincent whispered, turning to face Papa with eyes full of fury and pity. "You have the same thing she has, don't you? You've been torturing this child for having the exact condition that destroyed your own childhood." Papa's face crumpled like old paper. The secret he had guarded for 37 years was finally exposed, and with it came the crushing realization of what he had done to his innocent daughter. I thought if I could make her stronger than I was." Papa's voice broke completely. "I thought if I could force her to overcome it, she wouldn't have to live with the shame I've carried my whole life." "So you decided to give her different shame instead." Uncle Vincent's voice could have cut diamonds. The shame of being beaten, the shame of being locked in darkness, the shame of thinking she was broken and worthless. Papa had no answer. There was no answer. He had become the monster his own father had been perpetuating, a cycle of abuse that stretched back generations, all in the misguided belief that cruelty could cure what kindness and understanding could merely accept. Papa was arrested that night and charged with child abuse, child endangerment, and unlawful imprisonment. The trial became a sensation in Boston's Italian-American community, forcing difficult conversations about discipline, disability, and the generational trauma that immigrant families carried like invisible luggage. Uncle Vincent was granted temporary custody, and within a month, he had moved Mama Lucia and me to Providence, where I could start over in a school system that actually understood dyslexia. My new teacher, Mrs. Patterson, was a miracle worker who used techniques I had never experienced, colored overlays, to reduce visual stress, textured letters I could trace with my fingers, phonetic programs designed specifically for dyslexic brains. Elena. She told me on my first day in her classroom, "Your mind is like a beautiful garden that simply needs different kinds of sunshine to grow. We're going to find your sunshine together." The healing wasn't just academic, it was emotional and spiritual as well. Uncle Vincent arranged for me to see a counselor who specialized in childhood trauma, a gentle woman named Dr. Sarah Goldman, who helped me understand that Papa's cruelty came from his own pain, not from any failure on my part. "Your father was trying to beat out of you what he hated most about himself," she explained during one of our sessions. "But dyslexia isn't something that can be cured through punishment. It's simply a different way of processing information, neither better nor worse than other ways, just different." Slowly, painfully, but steadily, I began to heal. Not just from the physical wounds Papa had inflicted, but from the deeper damage to my sense of self-worth. Under Mrs. Patterson's patient guidance, I learned to read not quickly or easily, but competently. By 6th grade, I was performing at grade level. By high school, I was making honor roll. More importantly, I learned that intelligence comes in many forms, and academic performance isn't the only measure of a person's value. My dyslexia, which Papa had seen as a shameful defect, actually came with gifts-enhanced creativity, strong problem-solving abilities, and an intuitive understanding of how other struggling learners felt. Papa's trial lasted 3 weeks. I testified protected by screens and counselors, telling the judge about the basement, the beatings, the fear that had consumed my childhood. But the most powerful testimony came from Dr. Benedetti, who had examined Papa while he awaited trial. "Your Honor," Dr. Benedetti said from the witness stand, "Mr. Castellano has severe dyslexia, possibly more severe than his daughter's condition. He has compensated remarkably well through memorization and avoidance strategies, but he has never learned to read fluently. His abuse of Elena appears to stem from his own unresolved trauma around this disability." The courtroom was silent as Papa rose to address the judge before sentencing. He looked older, broken, diminished from the powerful figure who had once terrorized our household. "Your Honor," he said in a voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I was making her strong. I thought if I could force her to overcome what I never could, she wouldn't have to live with the shame that has followed me my whole life. But all I did was become the monster my own father was. I destroyed the most precious thing in my world because I was too proud and too scared to admit that I was broken too." He turned to look at me, sitting in the front row between Uncle Vincent and Mama. "Elena, I know you can't forgive me. I know what I did was unforgivable. But I want you to know that you were never the problem. You were never broken. The only broken thing in our house was me, and I was too much of a coward to fix myself instead of trying to fix you." Papa was sentenced to 5 years in prison, though he would serve only 2 before dying in a fight with another inmate, a fight that witnesses said he made no effort to win, as if he had finally given up on a life built on lies and hidden shame. I did forgive him eventually. Not because what he did was acceptable, but because carrying hatred was too heavy a burden for my heart to bear. Understanding his own struggles with dyslexia didn't excuse his cruelty, but it helped me see him as a wounded child who had never learned to heal, trapped in a cycle of abuse he was too damaged to break. Under Uncle Vincent's guardianship and Mrs. Patterson's teaching, I not only learned to read, but discovered I had a gift for understanding how other struggling learners felt. By high school, I was tutoring younger students with learning differences, finding joy in helping them discover that their brains weren't broken, just beautifully different. I went to college on a scholarship majoring in special education with a focus on dyslexia research. My senior thesis, titled "Breaking the Cycle: How Undiagnosed Learning Disabilities Perpetuate Family Trauma," won the university's award for undergraduate research and was later published in a professional journal. After graduation, I returned to Providence to teach at the elementary school, where Mrs. Patterson had given me my first taste of academic success. For 43 years, I specialized in helping children with learning differences, always remembering what it felt like to be the child who couldn't make sense of dancing letters. I married a wonderful man named Thomas Brennan, a social worker, who understood that my past had shaped me without defining me. "Your dyslexia isn't something you survived despite," he would tell me. "It's something you survived because of. It gave you empathy, creativity, and strength that you never would have developed otherwise." Thomas and I had 4 children together. When our youngest son, David, showed signs of dyslexia at age 6, we got him evaluated immediately. No shame, no punishment, no denial, just early intervention, appropriate support, and the unshakable belief that he was perfect exactly as he was. Today, David is a successful architect who designs schools specifically for children with learning differences. His buildings incorporate principles of universal design, creating spaces where all kinds of learners can thrive. He often jokes that his dyslexia made him a better architect because it taught him to see spatial relationships in unique ways. In 1985, I founded the Castellano Learning Center, a nonprofit organization that provides free screening and support for children with learning differences. We've helped over 5,000 families understand that dyslexia, ADHD, autism, and other neurological differences aren't defects to be cured, but variations to be celebrated. The center's motto, carved in marble above our entrance, reads, "Different minds, infinite possibilities." Every year, we hold a celebration where former students return to share their success stories, doctors, teachers, artists, engineers, entrepreneurs, who all struggled with learning differences but never stopped believing in their own potential. I've written 4 books about learning differences spoken at conferences around the world and helped change laws that protect children with disabilities from discrimination. But my proudest achievement isn't professional, it's personal. In 2010, I received a letter from a young teacher in Boston named Maria Castellano. She was Papa's great-niece, a woman I had never met who had heard whispered stories about the family scandal from decades past. "Dear Mrs. Brennan," she wrote, I have dyslexia just like you. So do my brother and my daughter. It runs in our family, but until recently, no one talked about it. Everyone was too ashamed, too afraid of being seen as defective. Your story gave me courage to get help for my daughter and to become the teacher she needs me to be. That letter led to a reunion with Papa's extended family, cousins, nieces, nephews, who had been carrying the same hidden shame for generations. We discovered that dyslexia ran through the Castellano bloodline like a river, touching nearly every generation, but never acknowledged, never discussed, never properly addressed. Together, we created a family scholarship fund that provides educational support for Italian-American children with learning differences. Every year, we award grants to students who might otherwise struggle in silence, helping them access the resources and understanding that could have saved Papa from a lifetime of hidden shame. Today, at 81 years old, I still struggle with certain aspects of reading and writing. I use audiobooks, voice-to-text software, and other accommodations that didn't exist when I was a child. But I've learned that these tools aren't crutches. They're bridges that allow different kinds of minds to reach their full potential. The basement that was meant to break me ultimately became the source of my greatest strength. Those 7 days of darkness taught me that human beings are capable of surviving almost anything if they refuse to surrender hope. The cruelty I experienced gave me an unshakable commitment to protecting other vulnerable children. Most importantly, I learned that our worst experiences don't have to define us. They can refine us, shaping us into people with the wisdom and compassion to help others facing similar struggles. Sometimes I still dream about that basement, the suffocating darkness, the sound of Papa's belt whistling through the air, the terror of believing I might die alone in that concrete tomb. But when I wake from those dreams, I'm surrounded by light, the morning sun streaming through my bedroom window, photographs of my children and grandchildren covering every surface, awards and testimonials from students whose lives were changed by understanding and acceptance rather than punishment and shame. The letters that once danced mockingly on the page have become my allies, helping me write books, articles, and curricula that make learning accessible to minds like mine. The condition that Papa saw as a curse has become my calling, connecting me to thousands of children who needed someone who truly understood their struggle. Papa died believing he was a failure, never knowing that his daughter would transform their shared disability from a source of shame into a beacon of hope. He never learned that dyslexia runs in families not as a genetic flaw, but as a different kind of gift, the gift of seeing the world through unique eyes, of solving problems in innovative ways, of understanding that there are many paths to wisdom. The little girl who was locked in darkness for the crime of learning differently grew up to bring light to thousands of other children walking similar paths. The basement that was meant to bury me instead planted seeds that would bloom into a lifetime of service, advocacy, and love. In the end, Papa's cruelty accomplished the opposite of what he intended. Instead of breaking me, it made me stronger. Instead of shaming me into conformity, it taught me to celebrate difference. Instead of silencing my voice, it gave me something important to say. The darkness couldn't hold me because I carried light within me, the light of possibility, the light of resilience, the light of understanding that every child deserves to learn in safety and be celebrated for exactly who they are. That light still burns today, passed on to every struggling student who discovers they're not broken, just beautifully different. It burns in every parent who chooses understanding over punishment, every teacher who adapts their methods to meet diverse needs, every policymaker who writes laws protecting rather than penalizing neurological differences. From my kitchen table in Providence, where I can see children walking to school with their backpacks full of dreams, I want every reader to know there is always hope, even in the darkest basement. There is always light, even when the world seems determined to extinguish it. The letters may dance, but we can learn to dance with them. The words may flip and scramble, but we can find new ways to make meaning. The path may be different, but it leads to the same destination: a life of purpose, contribution, and joy. Keep dancing, beautiful children. Keep learning in your own magnificent way. The world needs your unique gifts more than you know.